This morning, police are investigating a string of deadly shootings at 3 massage parlors in and around Atlanta.
Anti-Asian hate crimes increased by more than 300% in 2021.
The recent spate of hate attacks and harassment of Asian Americans has much deeper roots than Donald Trump tweeting about the China virus. I mean, that obviously was a provocation. But the idea that Asians don't belong in the United States, that goes back to the Chinese Exclusion Movement and the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was in law until 1952. And even though there's been an increase in Asian immigration since 1965, Asian Americans are still only 6% of the US population. But this idea that there's too many Asians, what's too many? What does that mean? And the thing about racism and nativism, I believe, is that it may have be rooted in a historical injustice. But nativism and racism need to be constantly reproduced. It's not just something that is a legacy and somehow lingers around. It has to be reproduced constantly. So anti-Chinese and anti-Asian American racism has this weight of history that pushes it into our own time, but it's also been reproduced through lots of local and state laws that survived well into the 20th century that forbid Chinese from marrying white people, owning agricultural property, holding commercial licenses, et cetera, as well as this long history of US colonialism and military action in the Asia Pacific. And that has been, even though offshore, has been a very powerful soil for the reproduction of anti-Asian racism. World War II, Vietnam and Korea happened in quick succession. You had some people in the military, especially in the higher ups, who served in all three wars. And they come back with ideas from those experiences. And the dehumanization of Asians through these wars is something that has a very specific kind of inflection, right? I mean, all wars dehumanize the enemy, but the dehumanization of Asians through US wars has been a very specific kind of racism that's built on the idea that Asian life is cheap. Asians themselves think lives are cheap, and that Asians, because they're not civilized and fight like barbarians, that therefore you can only fight them with like means. So you have the invention of water torture in the Philippines at the beginning of the 20th century during the US-Philippine War. You have the use of napalm and chemical weapons in Vietnam. You have the dropping of the atom bomb on Japan. This is actually the United States military that considers Asian life cheap and uses barbaric means, right? But this is very, very deep, I think, in American psyche. And it's connected to a view of Asian women, right? A kind of hypersexualization of Asian women, which actually starts in the exclusion era with a view that all Chinese women were prostitutes and therefore should be excluded. That was actually aimed at preventing natural reproduction of the Chinese population, but it was reproduced around US military bases and during US wars and US occupations in Asia and East Asia. So the Asian woman as a hypersexualized, always available, always desirable, but always dangerous female is something that also comes back into American culture. And so you see then the horrific murder of women at the Korean massage parlors and spas in Atlanta.
You can read May Ngai's trenchant analysis of nativism and 15 other vitally important contributions in Immigration Matters, Movements, Visions, and Strategies for a Progressive Future, the perfect handbook for activists, scholars, policymakers, and anyone seeking solutions for one of the defining challenges of our time.